As much as we might hate to admit it, there really is no better cheese for melting on a burger or making into a grilled cheese sandwich than good old American cheese. You know, American cheese in the modern times gets kind of a bad rap. It's referred to as plasticky or just outright plastic. It coming in the individual little pieces of plastic wrap that then sort of make the slice of cheese take the shape and indentations and form of that plastic wrap. Doesn't really help the whole thing. But when you really kind of start learning more about it, it isn't really fake anything. It is in fact cheese. It's just processed in a way that makes it a little different in texture and even how it acts under heat and how it can be stored and so forth. And it is real cheese in that to make it, we're actually starting with just a couple blocks of ordinary cheese. In this case, some cheddar cheese and Colby cheese. And the other ingredients are just ordinary, normal ingredients that you'd put in anything. Well, except for one that isn't probably especially common for the run-of-the-mill home cook. To process our cheese into the soft, melty American cheese we know, we have to use a product called sodium citrate. And sodium citrate is really just the sodium component of citric acid. It's used as a food flavoring, a preservative, and in the case of our homemade American cheese, an emulsifier. Basically, we need to take some fat and some liquid and some cheese and process it in a way that lets all those kind of conflicting ingredients meld together in one kind of homogeneous mixture of stuff that can then be reformed into American cheese. So I know this intro has been running pretty long, but this was a thing that was pretty interesting to me when I first came upon it. And I was like, who would have thought you could just make American cheese at home out of mostly regular stuff? Well, anyway, we'll get right into it and start making our homemade American cheese. As I mentioned, the main ingredient of our American cheese is regular cheese. And in the case of the classic American cheese flavor we're going for, I'm going to be using half cheddar cheese and half Colby cheese. And the first thing I need to do is grate it all up. Alternatively, I could cut it up into some very small pieces, but grating it is just going to be easier and faster. And I'm not going to use the entirety of both of these blocks of cheese, but I'll be using most of it. For the batch I'm making, I need 700 grams of shredded cheese, or about 1.5 pounds. And as I go, I'll weigh the shredded cheese on my kitchen scale to make sure I have 350 grams of both the cheddar and the Colby. And once I've got all my cheese grated, I just have to go ahead and measure out the amounts of the other ingredients I need. First, 1 whole stick of butter, so not really any measurement needed there. Next, we need 20 grams of that sodium citrate. And to weigh this out, I'll use my little high precision digital scale. The sodium citrate comes in the form of these little granules, and 20 grams equals just about 4 teaspoons. If you don't have one of these little high precision digital scales, just measuring 4 teaspoons will get you pretty close. And finally, we need our liquid, and in my case, I'm using heavy cream. And I need to weigh out 300 grams of that, which is almost exactly 1.5 cups. And I'll mention that there's a few different ways I've seen people do this, and most of them, I would kind of call them a cheater method, in that it's making something that acts kind of similar to American cheese and might taste pretty similar, but really isn't, I guess in the technical sense, actually American cheese. Some people will do some mixture with gelatin and some other things. Most of those ways, in my opinion, are more difficult than doing it the quote right way, using the sodium citrate. It's a super cheap product, very easy to get. I just buy it online to end up with something that I think is incredibly similar to the taste of store-bought American cheese, if not a little better in texture and consistency. Now we're moving over to the stove and we're going to actually start making this American cheese. The first thing I need to do is just get that stick of butter melted in a saucepan over pretty low heat. We're going to be sticking with pretty much a medium-low heat throughout this entire process. Once that butter is fully melted, I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle in that sodium citrate. Make sure it's all whisked in, and then give it just 30 seconds or so before we go in with that heavy cream. Whisk that all together nicely, and I'll just let the temperature start to come back up a little bit after pouring in that cold cream, maybe just a minute. And once that heavy cream and the butter start to bubble just a little bit, I'm going to start going in with that cheese. I'll just do a couple handfuls at a time, making sure to whisk it in and let it fully melt and incorporate into that liquid and butter, before adding in another couple handfuls and repeating. I'll just keep doing that until I've added all the cheese, making sure to whisk pretty much constantly. And again, we want this hot so it can melt, but we don't want it bubbling or burning or curdling or anything else. And by the time I've added just about all that cheese, this mixture will be super thick and viscous and may even seem a little hard to stir. But just keep whisking and stirring and you'll get all that cheese in there. After all that cheese is in and everything's looking pretty smooth and melted and consistent, I could move on to the next step at this time, but there's one extra little thing that I like to do just to ensure that this mixture is as smooth and silky and consistent as possible. And that's to hit it with my immersion blender for just a minute. Just give it a once over with that thing. Maybe not necessary, but I think it makes a more pretty looking final product. And I found it's pretty important to keep that mixture pretty warm, if not hot, right up until the moment that you're going to put it into your mold or similar. As soon as it starts cooling even a little bit, it begins to get too thick and stiff to even really work with. And another quick tip, as soon as you're done using any utensil or pretty much anything that this mixture has touched, clean it right away, or at the very least start soaking it in some hot soapy water. Because in this form, this cheese mixture isn't too dissimilar from that Plasta dip coating that you can use to add a rubber grip to a screwdriver handle or whatever. If you wait till it's completely solidified and cooled to begin cleaning, you're going to have a less than pleasant time doing the dishes. Now, for actually turning this cheese goo into a usable shape, a common method is to spread it all out on a parchment-lined baking sheet and do basically one very thin slice and then kind of hack it up into your individual little squares. But I much prefer to do it a different way in this cubed-shaped silicone mold and then slice it into thin slices myself. I can make a lot more cheese in a lot less space. Plus, I can decide how thick or thin I want my slices later. And if you want to take a look at this silicone mold that I'm using, I'll put a link to it in the video description below. So pretty much all we have to do is transfer that cheese mixture into the mold. But another super recommended tip is to first spritz that mold with cooking spray all over the inside. The first time I ever did this, I didn't use the cooking spray, and it was very difficult to get my block of American cheese back out later on without pretty much destroying it. But with a bit of cooking spray, it'll kind of slide right out of there with minimal effort. Then I'm just ladling in the cheese goo until it's almost all the way to the top. I won't go 100% to the top edge because I found that leaving just a little bit of space at the top really helps for thunking it upside down on the counter later when I want to dislodge that block out of the mold. And now I just have to stick this whole thing in the refrigerator for a while until it completely cools down and is fully solidified. This takes somewhere between 3 to 4 hours in the refrigerator. Once it's cold to the touch and completely solid, I'll give a little pull on opposing sides of the mold just to kind of separate those walls away from the cheese. And using a semi-flexible mold like this is really helpful for this. With the walls separated from the cheese, a couple relatively gentle upside down thunks on the countertop is all it takes to slide this whole thing out of that mold. And you may notice a little bit of a harder skin kind of forming on top, the side of the cheese that was exposed to the air in the fridge. And I've experimented with covering this with a bit of plastic wrap to prevent that, but there's a lot of moisture coming off of that cheese and it ended up just kind of getting all wet in there. So I find it preferable to leave it uncovered in the fridge and just accept that I might have to shave a little edge off where it started to form that bit of skin on top. And now we're ready to slice into this thing and give it a try. So I've got my somewhat handy but also pretty janky cheese slicer board thingy here that'll help me slice some kinda uniform pieces of cheese. You know, every brand of American cheese kind of has its own slightly unique taste, and I actually really like the Kroger brand deluxe American cheese. That's the slightly fancier one. But if I had to nail down what I think this homemade American cheese tastes like, I'd say that it's incredibly close to the taste of Kraft singles. So if that's the brand you like, this is probably going to be a recipe that you'll enjoy. But we can't just eat a hunk of this cheese and decide whether or not it's worthy. We got to do a little better of a taste test than that. So I think there's no choice but to make a grilled cheese sandwich. There's no way to get a nicer, more gooey, melty grilled cheese sandwich than by using American cheese. And these good thick slices, not individually wrapped in that yucky plastic, are going to be, I think, just perfect for this. Keep it pretty simple. A couple pieces of the rustic white bread. I like to melt some butter right in the skillet, slap the sandwich in there. When it's golden brown on one side, pull it out, a little bit more butter, throw it back down on the other side for a couple more minutes. Put that lid on the skillet to get the heat and the steam really trapped in there to help melt that cheese as quickly as possible. The goal, of course, being to melt all that cheese on the inside by the time the outside is the golden brown you want and not burnt. Yeah, it's a grilled cheese sandwich. It tastes just about the same as a grilled cheese sandwich made with something like Kraft singles. But honestly, I think it melts a little bit better and in a way that looks a little more appetizing than that plasticky kind of looking mass-produced stuff. But the taste, it's just about the same as you'd expect. I have no complaints, and I'd call that a completely enjoyable bite of grilled cheese sandwich. So by the official scientific grilled cheese method, I'd say that it was a success, as I expected it to be, since I have made this before. But throughout the process of making this video, I got to wondering, since the main ingredients of this American cheese were just cheddar and Colby cheese, would this same process work on other types of cheeses, like Swiss? I've had Swiss cheese on burgers and sandwiches at restaurants before, diners, greasy spoons, that kind of thing. That was definitely a processed cheese of some sort, rather than, say, fresh, ordinary Swiss cheese with all the little holes in it. So I figured as long as I'm going through all the effort of making this video, I might as well do a little bit of an experiment to see if the same process applies to making a Swiss cheese or similar. So we're just going to do the exact same thing we did the first time, except with different cheese. For this one, I'm going to do mostly Swiss cheese, but I'll also throw a little Munster in there because I love Munster cheese and I think it'll work with the Swiss quite well. But I haven't actually done this with anything other than the yellow cheeses, so I guess we'll find out. So again, I'll get 700 grams of that Swiss and Munster cheese grated up. Then melt 1 stick of butter on pretty low heat. Stir in that sodium citrate, let it cook for a minute, then in goes the heavy cream, followed by all that cheese. Sprinkled in gradually, whisking constantly. Hit it with the immersion blender just for good measure. Give that silicone mold a quick blast with some cooking spray, and then pour in all that melty cheese stuff, and then into the fridge for about 3 hours. And after a few hours, the Swiss version of the American cheese is completely firmed up and solidified. And now, once again, to try to get it out of this mold, hopefully completely intact. I'd say that's not bad at all. Definitely got to use that non-stick cooking spray if you want it to come out in one big beautiful cube just like that. And once again, I'll do my best using this cheese slicer to get some slices that are as even as possible, and that could have gone a lot worse. I've actually got some really nice thick slices that actually came out relatively even in thickness. I say that's really tasty. You definitely still get the essence of the Swiss and a little bit of that Munster in there. It's kind of sweet, which I think some Swiss kind of is. It's really quite tasty. But just like we did with the grilled cheese sandwich, I think I need to do a fully immersive proper taste test. And I'm going to do that by making perhaps my favorite meal that incorporates melty, beautiful Swiss cheese. And that's an onion Swiss burger. And an onion Swiss burger is a relatively simple affair. Get my cast iron skillet nice and hot, throw in a ball of ground beef, give it a bit of a smash, a pinch of one of my favorite burger seasonings, and let it get to frying. And in the meantime, I've already got some onions in a separate skillet getting nice and caramelized. And when that burger is cooked to just about where I want it, I'll set down a whole bunch of those caramelized onions, lay my piece of cheese over top, throw a lid on the skillet just to really help steam and melt that cheese real nice, thereby sealing in all those onions from spilling out all over the place. And you know I gotta give those buns a quick toast in some butter. Now to assemble, little bit of mayonnaise on the top and bottom bun, because why not? And then that beautiful burger patty with the caramelized onions and that amazingly melted Swiss-style American cheese. There's nothing wrong with that right there. That thick layer of Swiss cheese holding all those onions in. I cannot wait to take a bite of this. I gotta have another bite of that. A delicious onion Swiss burger, exactly like I hoped and expected it would taste. I'd say that American style Swiss cheese doesn't taste exactly like Swiss or Munster in the same way that the regular American cheese didn't taste exactly like Colby or cheddar. It tastes like an American cheesified version of Swiss, but it is incredibly similar to the processed Swiss cheese that I've had at restaurants like I was talking about earlier. It's completely tasty and beautifully melty. It really works quite well for the purpose that I was using it, and that's to melt on a burger. I'm not sure how often I'll go out of my way to make the Swiss version of this, but I think it was definitely worth trying, and I rather enjoy it. So anyway, I guess that about covers it. Is making this yourself at home going to be cheaper than buying a package of American cheese? Almost certainly not. Is it easier? Definitely not. But it's an interesting experiment, and I've ended up with a final product that I think is far superior to regular store-bought American cheese. Maybe in taste, but definitely in texture and meltiness and all-around enjoyability. And it's just kind of fun and interesting to see how it all comes together. And as always, I'll put the ingredients and proportions in the video description below if you want to take a look and try making this for yourself. And again, I'll also have a link to that silicone mold that I use also in the video description if you want to check that out. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date with all our latest stuff, including future cooking and food experiment videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'm John, and this is Great Lakes Country.